A History of Film, 1920 to 1925. The Roaring Twenties was an iconic decade. It actually was the first decade to have a nickname. It is most popularly referred to as the Roaring Twenties, but it's also been called the Jazz Age. Something big that happened in the 1920s is the ratification of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote. On May 21st, 1919, the House of Representatives passed the amendment, and 2 weeks later, the Senate did the same. Interestingly, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the amendment. This helped it reach its final goal of getting 3/4 of the states to agree with the ratification. The Secretary of State at the time, Bainbridge Colby, certified the ratification on August 26, 1920. Another noteworthy thing that happened was the release of the book The Great Gatsby. The book is now looked at as a defining novel of the 20th century. Think about how the characters were portrayed. That is most likely exactly what you and I picture when thinking about the 1920s. Even all the way in 2013, when the movie was released, people still are fascinated by the 1920s. The movie brought in $353.6 million at the box office. Moreover, people have Gatsby-themed parties. Even the Kardashians, who are a very controversial family in pop culture today, threw their mother, Kris Jenner, a Gatsby-themed 60th birthday party. Something else I found noteworthy was the difference in population between 1920 to now. The population in 1920 was at 105,710,620 compared to an approximate 327.2 million today. There were many changes in society. The nation's wealth doubled. This gave people some extra spending money that they weren't used to having. Cars became more affordable, and with that extra spending money, people were able to purchase more automobiles. Another big change is how radios became common in households. Hundreds of radio stations popped up throughout the decade. Much like magazines and newspapers, the radio was able to provide entertainment while sprinkling in advertisements throughout. Big films of the decade. One was Sherlock Jr. It debuted in 1924, and it was directed and starred in by Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton was a famous figure of that time. In Sherlock Jr., a projectionist chased his dream of being a star detective like that of Sherlock Holmes, only it was in a different way. He was actually dreaming. Sherlock Jr. was a big film of the decade. Buster Keaton starred in it. Buster Keaton was a big figure in this time period. The movie was released in 1924. Sherlock Jr. is a film about a projectionist and his dream of being a star detective like that of Sherlock Holmes. Another big film of the time was The Gold Rush. It was released in 1925. The film was starred in by none other than Charlie Chaplin, who is arguably one of the most famous figures in silent film history. In this classic comedy, Chaplin's character goes north to join the Klondike Gold Rush. He eventually gets trapped in a cabin because of a blizzard. There, he is forced to be in close quarters with a successful prospector and a fugitive. The 1920s saw the advancement of film with sound. According to ETHW.org, this was created by Lee DeForest. He demonstrated the process. The sound was recorded optically on a film strip. The amplitude variations of the sound were captured as variations in gray level on the film strip. In playback, the light shining through the soundtrack onto the photocell created an electrical signal sent to a loudspeaker. Unfortunately, Hollywood did not immediately show interest in this. This is in part because there was already so many failed attempts trying to synchronize picture with sound. Important people during this decade. D.W. Griffith was an important figure throughout silent movie history, although his career was praised because he was a highly innovative director and very successful. His later movies of his career did not go as planned. Later in life, his movies were not as successful, and he was forced to leave the production company that he was a part of. Charlie Chaplin is another famous figure during this time. Arguably, he's one of the most famous silent film stars ever. He left his mark on the film industry, and we still see his influence today. His overly exaggerated expressions and movements help him to convey what he wanted without the use of talking. William S. Hart was a stage actor. He eventually moved on to film. It is said that he went to the theater to see a Western and wasn't happy with how it was portrayed, so that is what helped him decide to get into acting in films. He would go on to star in approximately 70 films between 1914 and 1925. Rudolph Valentino was also another famous face throughout this decade. He was idolized throughout his career. He was famous for his romanticized roles in film, and he would go on to be called the Great Lover of the 1920s. The first major city for film production was New York City, but soon filmmakers would move to Hollywood. By the 1920s, Hollywood was the home to a major, profitable, and innovative industry. In the 1920s, movie palaces capable of holding thousands of people popped up in many major cities. A ticket to a double feature was only 25 cents. According to Khan Academy, by the end of the decade, the weekly movie attendance swelled to 90 million people. Sherlock Jr., like previously mentioned, was released in 1924. It's about a movie projectionist who wants so badly to be a detective. When he finds that his fiancée is robbed, the projectionist is framed for the crime. He begins using his subpar detective skills to try to solve the case. Then the projectionist follows the thief to the train station. Once he is there, he finds himself locked in a train car. The projectionist goes back to his movie theater. He then falls asleep and dreams that he is the Sherlock Holmes. This movie made a lasting impact on movies to come. I really respect Chaplin for his more calm demeanor rather than the spastic nature of Charlie Chaplin. Some of the gags in the movie also influence comedy, even in movies today. Some of the very same gags shown in the movie have been done in modern films, and they are still just as funny. The visual gags in the movie are simply hilarious. The special effects and camera work also made a lasting influence on future movies. Some of the aspects and illusions that Keaton did in the movie can be seen in present-day films. Sherlock Jr. was said to be Keaton's most complicated film for special effects and camera tricks. The film's most famous trick shot shows Keaton jumping into a small suitcase and disappearing. This was accomplished by a trap door. Keaton later told film historian Kevin Brownlow, "Every cameraman in the business went to see that picture more than once, trying to figure out how we did some of that." Keaton's special effects and optical illusions were advancing the art of film. The illusions and effects were amazing and like nothing that had been seen before. This gave push to the art of filmmaking and the creation of new effects and camera techniques. The humor alone in this film makes it incredibly enjoyable. A true sign of a great movie is if its comedy holds up over time. Watching this movie in the present is still as funny as it must have been in 1924. The effects and camera angles wow the audience and keep them interested in what is going to happen next. The story is intriguing also. Honestly, though, you begin to feel bad for Keaton. When things start to go wrong, one can see the sadness in his eyes, and one can begin to become sad for him. However, the constant comedy gags in the movie are able to keep the viewers laughing out loud. This movie can be classified under many different genres. It does not simply fit into one. The genres in this movie fits under are as follows. It is a silent movie. There's no dialogue. There's only an orchestra playing music over the scenes. It is also a comedy. Its running gags are enough to keep anyone laughing. It also has some elements of drama because the drama comes from the girlfriend getting robbed, the projectionist getting framed, and the projectionist trying to find the thief.